So good day and welcome. Thanks for stopping by to see what's going on with my podcast this week. I'm outside today taking advantage of a nice day. Hopefully I don't glare too much in the light. Just a couple things before we jump into the podcast. I had originally stated that I wanted to post new podcasts on Tuesdays, but it seems like there's always something that comes up on Monday, something unplanned, something that takes too much of my time, and it interferes with me getting ready to get this ready for publication. So we're switching to Thursday. So greetings and welcome to my first Thursday podcast. And from now on, we're going to shoot for Thursday. I also wanted to say thank you to those of you who have provided feedback. Whether it's on one of the platforms or whether there were a couple of you that had my personal email, and so you sent that email to me, and I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate everything that people have said to try to help make this a better podcast. I want it to be something that you want to come and listen to, and that you want to visit. I'm trying to get this. It looks like there's just funny colors coming out here. So anyway, last week we talked about undocumented immigrants and whether they had anything to do with increased crime in the country. And as I was preparing for that, I came across some material about unaccompanied children that were coming to the southern border, that were coming into the country. And it was very interesting. So I started digging more into that. And as I dug, I came across an amazing article that was written by the New York Times. Now, before some of you put down the New York Times, this was actually a very well done piece, whether you agree with their politics or not. It was a very well done piece of journalism, and in particular talking about the unaccompanied children. And so what the author did was she went and found over 100 unaccompanied children that were somewhere around the country, and she went to 20 different states to talk to these particular individuals. She talked to teachers in some of the school districts where these kids were enrolled in schools, or should have been enrolled in schools, or had been enrolled in school and dropped out. She talked to members of from the Department of Health and Human Services, from ICE, and so she did a really excellent job. And so as I went through that, it was really kind of amazing to see what she had done. She found all these kids that were doing things. Several of the children were working in plants run by Hearthland company, a huge company that runs like 39 plants across the country, and they do work for General Mills, for Quaker Oats. So these children, 13, 14, 15 years old, were working on manufacturing assembly lines, filling boxes with cereal. They were packing Nature Valley granola bars. There were 12-year-olds that were involved in construction industry as roofers. They found them in Florida and Tennessee. Underage children, underage workers that were working in slaughterhouses in Delaware and in Mississippi. They found a 14-year-old that was working 12 and 14-hour shifts overnight while he was trying to go to school, and he was sawing lumber all night long. That was in South Dakota. In Los Angeles, they found younger kids that were sewing Made in America tags in J. Crew t-shirts. They found kids working in commercial bakeries where they were making dinner rolls to be sold at Walmart and in Target. They found kids working in milk processing plants, and the milk was being processed for Ben and Jerry's ice cream. They made Fruit of the Loom socks in Alabama, and they found kids in some manufacturing plants where they made auto parts to be used in Ford and GM vehicles. And so it's kind of like, well, how in the world did we ever get to this place? And if we go back, because really unaccompanied children are nothing new to the southern border. They've been coming for generations, but finally in 2008, Congress passed some legislation that said we cannot turn away unaccompanied children, which is probably a good thing. Most people, I think, would agree with that. Otherwise, if you turn them away, they're not going home. They're going to be stuck in those border towns on the Mexican side of the border, and that's not where you want them to be. So after 2008, they had to take all of the unaccompanied children that were coming to the border, and they would take them. They would find sponsors for them temporarily as they went through the process, and so they found places for those kids to live until their paperwork was done and they were approved, or whatever their disposition was at the end of the processing. And the problem became that as the world came out of the pandemic, in 2021, the numbers just skyrocketed. Over 100,000 unaccompanied children into the United States in 2021, and the same was true in 22 and 23. 24 is a little bit lower, but over the last 4 years, that's over 400,000 unaccompanied children that have come to the southern border, and just kind of amazing. And so we remember those pictures of the kids in the cages, covered in foil blankets, laying on the floor, and that's not where we want them. And so those kids were being processed out of those detention centers by HHS, the Health and Human Services people. They would take those children and they would vet them and match them up with sponsors somewhere in the country, and they would release them. Now, some of those children went to their parents who were already in the United States in whatever fashion. Many of them were released to aunts, to uncles, to cousins, to brothers, to sisters. There were a significant number of them that were released to people unknown, and that's how it was documented, unknown. And so these kids then were released all across the country to people that were supposedly family members or were supposed to care for these children. When HHS developed the criteria for what it was to be a sponsor, you had to take care of the welfare of the children. You had to make sure that they went to school and that they could not work. I mean, that was part of it, which is kind of interesting, because most of these kids came to the United States wanting to work and send money back home. They wanted to help out their family that was there, or maybe help out their family that was here. And a couple of stories that were in this article. Carolina, 14 years old, living in Guatemala with her grandmother. The economy is in the dumps. They hardly have any food, therefore they don't have, or money, can't afford food. So when the world started to open up after COVID, Carolina joined a caravan, came to the United States. While she was in the detention center, they were able to get hold of her aunt, who lived in Michigan, who reluctantly took her, allowed her to go to school, said, hey, you got to go to school, but you also have to work to help money, because we need money, and you need to send money back home. Her aunt had her own 2 children and her husband, as well as 2 other people that were living with them, all on $600 a month. So it was, um, yeah, I mean, Carolina wanted to work. She wanted to raise money, send back to her grandmother in Guatemala to help her. Um, and in the end, um, well, so Carolina, I guess, went ahead and got a job at Hearthland. She was the one packing Cheerios every 10 seconds, stuffing a bag of Cheerios in a box, stuffing a bag of Cheerios, working in an environment that a 14-year-old girl should not be working in. It's very dangerous. That conveyor belt had amputated fingers, hands, even arms from employees in the last couple of years. That very conveyor belt in that particular plant had done that. And so she was working overnight shifts, trying to go to school during the day. She wanted to go to school. She wanted to learn English. She wanted to do better. And in the end, she quit school to continue to work to raise money. Another story was a young man met his sponsor on Facebook and came to the United States, got to Florida, and his sponsor handed him a handwritten list of all that he owed his sponsor, $4,000 plus he was charging him interest. And that young man worked for over a year trying to pay that off. And eventually he went to the law enforcement, the authorities, and they convicted the gentleman, his sponsor, of being bringing a child for labor purposes or whatever. I don't remember the exact charge, but so he was free from that. And the article didn't say where that young man is. One other young man had met somebody from Manassas, Virginia, and so his acquaintance said, "Hey, come and you can stay here. I'll help you." And so the young man went to Virginia. Ended up he was forced to paint houses during the day. And he was forced to be the security for an apartment complex at night, sleeping on the concrete floor of the basement of this apartment building. And his sponsor would take all of his paychecks, so the young man never had any money. He did call the emergency helpline that all these kids have access to, and they did nothing. He was very, very disappointed. He thought somebody would at least come and check out what he had said. But he said nobody showed up. And eventually he was able to get out of that situation and move on. Again, the article doesn't say where he's at now or what his disposition is. And so it's just really a sad story over and over again. These kids that came to the United States, yes, they came to work, but they all ended up in terrible situations, working in jobs that they shouldn't be working in, and so then there got to be finger pointings. HHS says, hey, we don't have the people to go into the workplace and monitor these kids. But HHS was supposed to be doing follow-ups, hey, how's it going? Where are you at? How's your sponsor? But they were overwhelmed with the sheer numbers in 2021 and 22 and 23. And that didn't happen, even though they hired contract agencies to do some of the casework. In the first year, they lost track of 80,000 kids. Not in the first year, but over the 3 years, they lost track of 80,000 of those kids. They don't have any idea where they are, what they're doing, or how life is with them. And HHS was overwhelmed. The article did interview several HHS employees. Some of them had been fired because they raised concern. Why are we allowing this individual to sponsor more children when he's already sponsored 18? And we don't know where the 18 are. We don't know what their status is, where they're at. But yet we're considering giving him more children to sponsor. That particular individual was demoted and later fired. There was a contractor in San Francisco that raised concerns, similar types of concerns that about the sponsor that they were going to release some children to. And she went to lunch 2 days later, and she came back and her badge wouldn't get her in the building. She'd been fired, she'd been terminated. And so it's just a really sad story of how we failed these kids. No, we do not want to see them stuck in cages in detention centers and sitting on the concrete floor, sleeping on the concrete floor. But at the same time, we need to do something to keep them from ending up working in jobs that they shouldn't be working in, living lives that teenagers shouldn't be living, that they need to be in homes, be going to school, getting educated, looking for a longer term solution. This map that you see on the screen now, in the end, the New York Times sued HHS for this information. This is data from January of 2015 to May of 2023, showing where the unaccompanied children were released to non-parental sponsors. Now, they could have been family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and there were a lot of those if you look at that. But what the New York Times got was a 550,000 line spreadsheet with this information, zip code, and some other pieces of information. So the New York Times created this map. The darker colors are larger concentrations of where these children were released. And I look at this map and I question, why were children released to some of these areas of the United States, especially if they're released to non-parental sponsors. I'm from South Dakota, and I look at South Dakota, and I know where those dark squares are, and what is there. And it matches up with the stories that are in that article, the type of places these children end up working, and I just think it's sad. And so read the articles. You make up your own decision as to what you think was done wrong or done right. But I'll just leave you with one question. Like I've said, we do not want to leave the kids in the detention centers. That's no place for children. But how can we do it right? How can we make sure that these children are not exploited out in the world? How can we track their status and what's going on in their lives? We've got to do a better job than this, and we didn't in the last 3 years, 4 years. So hopefully you learned something. I learned a whole lot from reading the articles. Look forward to hearing your feedback. Have a blessed week, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.